Well, let's do this. Just at the beginning, I'll set the stage of where biological monitoring fits into holistic management. And you can stop me at any time. I don't really have a role I'll get on. I'm just covering some points that have helped me. I want to share it with you, and I'm willing to be stopped at any time to answer your question. As far as managing the biological capital, that's kind of what we'll focus on, but yet where that fits in the whole holistic management picture, I'll try to clarify that too so that it sets the stage since some of you are new to that. The land speaks one. Do you speak dog? Sometimes. Can you, we talk to our dog, we can speak a language, right? We could whisper, be a dog whisperer. When you travel around any state or around the world, the land speaks the same language. And so what we can do is learn to read the land and see what it's telling us. And what we're looking for in holistic management is the earliest possible signs that tell us what's changing on the land so that we can pick up, is it moving in the direction we want or is it going the other way? Before we get into how to do that, basically holistic management is just this whole farm process. It's looking at the whole system. We really cannot separate out the people, the choices. The reason for that decision-making class, Ryan, was that people might learn like how to go use a skill of grazing or intensifying it into stock density management, mob grazing, or some other skill, but maybe they've never actually sat down and made decisions looking at the whole picture to determine, for example, mob grazing isn't what I should be doing yet because I have plenty of grass. That'll produce me more grass, but I don't have enough animals, or I'm not marketing what I raise now. So the whole decision making puts things in perspective to know what to do first. Essentially, we've got this decision making process, and then we've got a financial plan. You need to have a land or an infrastructure improvement plan. You can have a grazing plan, which really is used to manage all the tools you're going to use, grazing or animal impact, fire, wildlife management. We put all of that on our grazing plan. It's just that grazing is such a key if you're running livestock on land. And then lastly, you need to be monitoring how you're changing that biological capital. The monitoring I'll run through here is a little bit more geared toward permanent cover and meadows. We have a little adaptation to it of things to look for with crop monitoring when you're either tearing up the ground totally for a large crop or you're doing a market garden, a couple other things you'd add to it. If we just start with what are we talking about when we say we're trying to improve the biological capital, well, I think it'd be all of these things, but it's really, how they then work together and make this really living soil. Like this, you were saying about how is our soil up to what it could be? I took that as, is it really alive and living and producing and letting plants grow or vegetables grow, and we can take things off and eat them or sell them and make a living, but that base isn't being depleted. We're increasing it. Where do we look for the earliest signs of change? We could do a soil sample. We could have it come back with, there's so much nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. We could do a plant inventory and see, well, there's so many of this plant and that shrub and these trees. But where are the earliest signs going to be picked up of how that ecosystem is going to change? Because what if I do something to the land and 5 years later I see shrubs coming in and now they're 2 feet tall? I could come back 5 years, do it now, come back 3 or 5 years and say, oh, I don't want those shrubs coming. But that's a little late. That's 2-3 years down the road. Where do we look every year to see that it'll tell us the precursor of what's to come? Ever thought about that? We're going to look at the soil surface. Okay? So as we go through this today, we're going to talk about looking down when you walk as opposed to across. When you just look across a cornfield, it looks great. But when you get out in a cornfield and look straight down, it's mostly bare ground. That's an extreme example. When you're looking across a meadow, it looks good. But when you are looking down as you walk across it and observing that soil surface, you start to pick up for example, how dense the plants are, how much bare ground you have between it. Especially if it's gray short at a point and it's not covered by all the leaves, you can really see I've got plenty of room here for new plants. All right, let's keep going here. If we throw out the term ecosystem or the environmental processes or ecosystem processes, they're really all, there's one. The ecosystem's working. But it's like this room. We could have a window like that on each side looking into this room. And we could focus on looking at the environment, the ecosystem, by looking at it through the water cycle. How's the water cycling? We could look at it through another whole window. But we're looking at the same thing, but just focusing it on the mineral cycle and the nutrient cycle. Are things growing? Are they decaying? Is that living organic matter moving? Right? Is it growing? Is it decaying into humus? We could look through, say, another window up here and say, is it capturing energy? Is it capturing sunlight? If it's vegetables or beef, you guys are in the sunlight capturing business. You've heard I'm not a grass farmer, I'm a solar farmer or sunlight farmer, or something like that. And then that structure of plants and animals. And so this is where you're correct. Looking at plants focuses in there. What's happening to the plants and animals? Is the communities changing? And in those communities, do we have healthy communities? Do we have all just old plants and adult plants and dying plants? Do we have any teenage plants, young plants? So let's look at each one here for a minute. Let's take a walk through the water cycle. You could take a whole thick, you get a zoology or a biology textbook, and there's lots of information in there, which is good information to know how things work. But we need to back up just a little bit sometimes and see how the processes work. I ran a youth camp guest ranch for several years, and it was focused on the environment, and then hired lots of college-age students as staff. And some could come and identify every plant on the farm. And that's good. It's better than I could do, and I'm trying to do that. But they couldn't see what they were still seeing. All that's there, but why? Why are there all these annuals there? Well, succession's low enough, I can't get through it to perennials because I'm managing it wrong for what I want. Or maybe that's what I want, and I'm managing it for what I want, but I didn't know it. Let's talk about the water cycle for a minute then. In the big picture, water comes off the ocean and falls on land. Other water can evaporate up from land and go over and fall on land again. So we want some water to come, but how about just, that says a microcycle under the canopy. Must have composting litter. All right, let's talk about that. When you've got that much plant material of some kind, and your goal is to have that, this isn't where I want my tennis court or the roof of my building, where I want an ineffective water cycle. On those places, I want the rain to hit and run off. But on agricultural land, we want an effective water cycle. The more effective, the better. So when rain comes here, and those raindrops come pelting down at 50 miles an hour, we've got a lot of good canopy to break them from just pulverizing the soil surface. But we've also got a water cycle going on. It's kind of like if this were the top of my plants, it's just circulating water right in here. It's helping keep it in there. So the enemy of healthy functioning ecosystems is bare ground because water leaves. So from the water standpoint, we need water in there. Now, that is regrown, it's healthy, it's covering the soil. I'm going to show you to fine-tune our eye a little bit here now. How would the water cycle be there as far as water hitting and soaking versus running off versus there or there or there? Now this one's, we can start to pick up what's happening to the soil surface since it's not covered by some plant either living or laying down dead plant litter. When it rains, what's it doing? And it would run because it's compacting it. If you've ever seen a movie of a raindrop hitting the ground in slow motion, it hits and pulverizes. It breaks down the soil particles, and the little pieces lay out flat, and slowly it caps over. And you know this in your garden. It's all hoed up nicely and you get a rain. And you get this little crust again, so you hoe it again so the next rain can come in. Well, you're doing that to help improve the water cycle so water doesn't run off. So if we go back through those a little bit, see each one gets better at the ground's covered to where you're going to hold the water you get. If you're raising a crop that needs 30 inches a year, but as the rain comes, you might get 30, but 15 went right away to your neighbor. Well, you had an effective rainfall of 15. You could increase your rainfall without any more rain by making it more effective. Let's look at, I'm going to stay on the water cycle. This happens to be West Texas, but it wouldn't matter. If there's an acre of ground there on a hill, the reason I put this slide in is he's got a water tank up there. And that holds about 27,000 gallons of water. He's actually turned it into a nice little swimming hole, which I think was kind of cool. But he's just using it to put pipe water out to different scale than we're working with here to some livestock tanks. But I wanted you to visually see 27,000 gallons of water. It's a typical swimming pool. That's only critical because that's how much water there is in an inch of rain per acre. All right? 1% of humus and organic matter in the soil can hold 10,000 gallons of water. So if you can get your organic matter, in this case up to close to 3%, a 1-inch rain could come and it shouldn't run off. As long as your soil's not capped over, the water cycle can work effectively, more effectively. We have it covered with some canopy. We've got some plant litter on the ground, and the actual soil surface is broken and crumbled like you'd hoed it. That'd be the ideal, to have most of the water soak in. So those are the things we would look for, because each year when we do our biological monitoring, because it would then tell us what is going to happen. This is good for seed germination. And then we'd look at the plants. We are seeing some seedlings. We are seeing some new annuals try. Whatever comes, we can then manage for what comes, but we are getting new things, as opposed to looking down the road later and saying, all right, we have these mature plants and these. That's too late for the early warning signs to tell us if the tools we're using on the land are moving us the direction we want to go. So in an ineffective water cycle, you're going to get more water running just right away when it rains. Now, if you get 3.5-inch rain and it comes down really hard, you're going to lose something. Something will run. Well, then at least we should be trying to catch it in our lowlands before it goes to the neighbor. Certainly trying to catch it somewhere. So an ineffective water cycle, bare ground doesn't help because it tends to cap over and run off. So we don't want much bare ground. We don't want capped soil. And recent is that little cap you get right after the first rain. You've hoed it up, get a rain, even a sprinkle. You start to get it capped over, a little bit of pulverization. An immature cap versus then a mature one. An immature cap might be when you go home and you pull the plants apart and you look at some bare ground between plants. Is it starting to get like 1/8 to 1/4 inch thick of a cap on it, a seal layer that has been there a while because it's not been hoed up by you or by livestock or by some mechanical means? That would be an immature cap. Can you picture what a mature cap might be like? Here in Pennsylvania, because you've got enough humidity above ground, you've got enough water to help make things grow and to decay. If you pull that soil apart and in between plants on bare ground, you've got some lichen, some moss. That's a mature cap for you guys. Where I am, it turns into a black crust, a black cryptogamic soil. It's just very, very long rested. It's not had any tool used on it. It's not been broken. If you're wanting to have things grow and use the water as best they can, you need to be decreasing this mature capping, decreasing the amount of bare ground. You need to, if it's an ineffective water cycle, you've got a lack of canopy above the ground to shade the ground. Litter, again, is plant material grows, and then as it falls, that's litter on the ground. If it's just laying on the ground, there it is, it fell over, and I can definitely tell the litter from the soil surface. That's what we call litter 1. If it's starting to decompose and decay and incorporating into the ground, that's composting itself, that's litter 2. That's what we want to be working toward. Now, we always ask for more water sometimes to grow things. Not always. We have plenty of water sometimes. It takes water to grow. It also takes moisture to decay things. We've got to get it on the ground, into the ground to decay. Yep. John?
The question I have is on that moss. You said moss is a sign of mature capping?
Yes.
Does that, I have that little bit between plants.
Yeah.
I know they're rested a little bit more. And generally, most people say, well, you need calcium if you got moss, but that's probably more of a sign of...
It could be, but it's also a sign of... Go ahead.
Well, it depends. If you've got something that hasn't had stock on it and you're getting all of that stuff, it could be because it's over-rested.
Right.
This might be in
the question,
grass that hasn't been on since the previous year, and we're talking maybe by late July, August. It's the first time cattle been on that for that year, and that grass is getting big. It's getting some brown in it. That's the stuff where you graze and you see that moss.
Toward the end of this, we'll talk about the tools you use to affect these things. If you put animals on land or mechanically hoe it, cultivate it, you're breaking those caps. And if you go away for a while, it will moss over. That's good from the standpoint it's not letting soil move. But it is a sign of over-rest of the soil surface, which if you're trying to produce as much as you can, you have more production potential there than you're using. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I never looked at it that way with the moss.
Yeah. It's a sign of it's actually partial rest, because you do have animals in the pasture, but it's not at a stocking rate. The stocking rate may be fine. The stock density is not enough to actually incorporate all that and get it all functioning. So, it's, in a sense, you start to look at what you're leasing or buying, and if you see the potential that's not being used in the production, you could buy a farm or lease a farm that's up to half its potential. You bring it up to its potential, you just leased a second farm for free. Anyway, you get the point there. We need to see if we have a water cycle that's as effective or not as it could be. Soil surface wasn't ready, so the water cycle wasn't as effective as it could be. So, in this case, I happened to be out in West Texas right when they got their, the old saying goes, well, we get 9 inches of rain a year, and I remember the day it came. You better be ready. And it's not a lot different back here. When it comes, use it. You had a dry spell last summer, didn't you? From like into May into July. So you need canopy to protect what you had in the spring, and you want water to hold it. You go more than 3 or 4 weeks, you want the ground to be able to mitigate those dry periods, those drouthy times, and carry you through them better. They had that much rain, but most of it ran off. So for it to be effective, we need it soaking in. We don't need it running right off. We don't need it moving litter. If you look down on a hill and you see all your litter's kind of moved and it's in little litter dams because it's kind of washed and then got caught next to the next plant and washed. You've got, even if soil's not moving yet, you've got water moving. So you're not catching it where you need it. We want it soaking in and oozing out in springs. And yet, how many people say, well, this homestead was put here because, why? Well, when great-granddad settled there, there was a spring. He didn't say, I'm going to put my house here because the spring's over there. And we've essentially kind of taken our land and squeezed it out. We need to fill it back up like a sponge, get these springs flowing again. These are some of the keys. No pedestals around plant bases. If you've got a plant that's kind of above the rest of the ground around here, and it's up here, it didn't build itself a mound. This is blown or washed away as far as soil beside it. And pedestaling varies in different parts of the country, different slopes, different rainfall amounts. How do we achieve an effective water cycle? Well, a gardener manages the soil. He might hoe it to remove a cap for moisture to go in. On a larger scale, we need to garden with livestock or wildlife. It's hard to manage your wildlife, but many times they will fall in behind livestock on a grazing plan because they're pursuing that freshest feed coming up behind them. Causes a little overgrazing, but they do, when we have a proper grazing plan going, sometimes we do get the livestock moving behind them as if they had a predator still around, which we're missing. The system's broken in many cases. All right, so we were just looking at the ecosystem through that window over there, a water cycle. Now we're going to look at it through just another angle, but we're looking at the same thing, but we're focusing on it from a different angle. So this mineral or nutrient cycle means, are things growing and decaying? So that one compared to these others. Now you wouldn't see anything to that extreme right here. But what is the thing we're looking for to tell us if things are not decaying? Yes. Exactly. Certainly lack of earthworms. As far as specifically like the plants on the ground, the litter on the ground, no problem. The old manure on the ground, the color of it. The color tells us how old it is. If I'll back up here. If it's this year, most everything that's growing is green. And it's as simple as things turn brown when they freeze in the fall. And if they don't rot and go underground or get pulled underground by dung beetles and lots of microorganisms that first year, if they stay above ground, it's what?
They turn white.
Yeah, you go from brown to gray or even a black. And so where I live, because it's so dry above ground, unless I physically put it on the ground where it's humid and it starts to rot, it just sits there. And when it turns gray, what it's telling you is it's oxidizing or rusting into the air. So you're mining your soil. Every plant you grow that you don't put in the ground goes up into the air. Here, if you look in the east, as I've done work up and down the east coast, the most I'll ever see is start to see a tint, not to that extreme, but just a tint on some seed heads of some gray or some white color. That's telling me it's been above ground long enough it's actually oxidizing and going up instead of biologically decaying and being put in the ground. So this is probably the most outstanding universal language when you get off the plane anywhere you go in the world. As you're looking around, look at plants, and it'll tell you how they're decaying on their own.
So if you're grazing someplace and you're done, finished, and you move off to something else, and you see that happening, do you want to mow it to get it off the tops and down on the soil?
So if I was a normal, here we're back up into a little bit of what holistic management is and what it brings. The question was, if I am on somewhere and then I leave it and I have old plant material and it's either just there or turning gray, would I mow it? The short answer is yes, you could. But would you? You would go back and look at your financial plan and see, do I have the money in there to mow and the labor to mow? The money and time I'd spend doing that, is there something else I should do that returns me a bigger bang for the buck? And even though I don't like looking at that, I'm going to not do it. I'm going to do this. Or you may say, I don't like the way my neighbors might think my pasture looks to the point where I'm going to mow that even if it costs me money I should spend here. You're making decisions based on the whole picture of the people involved, the land involved, and the money involved, and where you're trying to move. So I don't want to say it depends, but it does. It depends upon your vision of where you're taking the place and where you're trying to go. And that you includes you and the other decision makers on the farm at the level that you're at. But you could mow something to take it down. Let's move. Okay, mineral cycle. It needs to grow and decay. What if you get too much old thatch up there? Right? It slows decay down. If you have a whole bunch of stuff and it all lays down one way, doesn't that pretty well smother new growth coming through? But animals, a herd tends to lay it all different ways. And that doesn't smother. It eventually goes down into the ground, but things, other plants can come through it quicker. Biological decay requires moisture and life versus that chemical oxidation going up. When you burn it to get rid of things, when you use a tool of fire, it'll get rid of it, but it has put it up into the air, most of it, and you're not increasing moisture and life. Usually a fire does the opposite. It dries out and kills for a while. So periodic fire might have been okay, but real repetitive fire off, on and on and on every year is not what I don't think nature did with lightning in the same place. That's more a man-caused. Bare ground doesn't increase moisture or life. So again, bare ground is an enemy. Let's change and look through the window a whole different way. We're going to now look at things looking at, are we capturing the sun? You're in the sun capturing business. You're trying to turn that into $1 to trade for other goods. As far as the amount of plants and the density of plants, the width of leaf blades, and if that was a bunch of, say, that's mostly a cool season plant, but if there were some warm seasons in there, that would be good. I'd be capturing a lot of sunlight. Versus where I've got fewer plants, thinner blades, a little more bare ground, I'm not capturing. The sun's throwing it at me, I'm not capturing it. If my goal for that piece of land is to have an effective, productive, agricultural piece of ground. And it gets worse. If there's more bare ground, less plant material, and we're just not capturing the energy. So in that picture, you could say, well, from the water cycle standpoint, I can see it even looks a little shiny, sealed. The water's going to run off. I don't see a whole lot of old material. It's either been eaten off or blown away as far as old material to oxidize. Maybe there's a little old stuff there. And I've certainly got a low level of plants and animals for succession. And energy flow, I'm not capturing a lot of sunlight. And what?
You're scared enough.
Yeah. Scared enough would be one word. Stressed enough might be another. Right? Once the leaf blades stop and the seed stalk comes up and tries to do the reproductive part, it is scary. It's saying, hey, I'm running out of water. I'm thinking I may not survive. I better put out seed. John?
Yeah, and did you say that, I don't think you actually said that, but the bare ground, you're not getting the sunlight, but you're also, when that sun's hitting that soil, it's heating it up and it's drying it out.
Yeah.
So you're losing your moisture a lot quicker.
Yes, you are. And you're reflecting heat. It's hotter to walk across a pasture that would be like this than across a thick grassed pasture because it's all reflecting up. And some people would say, well, that's okay. It'll dry out the top couple of inches of ground, and that is like a barrier to hold the moisture underneath. And that's the whole theory of the every other year wheat farming on the Great Plains. There's not enough moisture every year to raise the crop, so they raise it every other year. They let that happen. They till up all the weeds every year. Well, it depends what you're trying to create and where you're trying to go. If you can catch some of the underlying principles, it helps you know why you're doing what you're doing. Energy flow. Let's keep in mind that we have two crops here. We got one above ground and the other one underground. Over half the plant is usually underground. But we can't see it very easily, so we need to assess how it's doing based on what we see above ground. So we can increase capturing the sunlight by the number of plants, by each plant having broader leaves, taller leaves, expressing up to the ability it can express and can be. And lastly, how about getting our warm season plants back into our pastures? If you're, again, I'm going at this today from just a covered perennial pasture that's a polyculture. As many different plants as we could. And, if you start drying out, there's nothing good to eat in July and August. Well, where are your warm season plants that grow and do well in the warm season? Maybe you've inadvertently timed your grazing every year to where you have hurt those from maintaining themselves or reestablishing. So you've actually used a tool that has knocked them out. And if you're wanting to have better season-long grazing, they need to come back. And that could be done through your management. If you bought some seed and seeded it, but your management's still wrong to allow for them to establish, then you spent your money out of order. Get your management first, and you may never have to buy the seed in the second place. Plant and animal communities. They say that to us, we really like a combination of grass and trees and shrubs and a little rolling. That's what the human eye thinks is most pleasing. That savanna type look. Well, okay. If your farm, though, is needing to produce trees or grass or vegetables, you've got these enterprises you're deciding to create to produce your income, that's fine. But what we're trying to do is develop our eye to see where are we in all of these plant and animal communities. What are we creating? If we're wanting more trees like this, are we getting seedlings coming up? That's a fence post, but Are we getting seedlings? Are we getting some teenage trees? Or is all we have the old ones? So eventually they'll be gone, maybe a ways down the road. Same with our plants. Are we having seedlings come up here? There is bare ground between those plants if we walked and looked straight down. And is that bare ground establishing? Are there new annuals and seedlings coming? Or is it stuck in the moss stage because it's kind of over-rested? And what are we trying to create, and are we moving there? These are the things we monitor for to see, and we will check it this year, and then we do it next summer. It takes a couple hours to go through, run a transect, we take a dart and throw it out there and look at the soil surface and measure some things. And then the next year we do it again. I couldn't tell you by walking by this pasture if that's 80% plants and 20% bare ground. And then next year, well, that's gone to 82% plants and 18% bare ground. That's the kind of measurement that we do to see if we're making the progress, because we just don't pick it up with our eye. Again, we're trying to, plant life, it's hard to catch all the animals out there, but we've got some plants, forbs. Okay, let's start here. We got trees and shrubs, and down here we've got the non-woody species, grasses and forbs, F-O-R-B, all your legumes, all your dicots, all those. The more complex you have, the better as far as a stable environment. The less complex, the more chance you have of an outbreak of this or that. With a pasture at this end, you've got covered soils year-round. With, say, row crops here, if you're farming at this end, at least once a year you're bearing the soil. It's both agriculture. Which end fights nature and which end emulates nature the most? Susan?
I was just looking at that and thinking about if we knock the screen up and looked at now what does that pasture want to do further to our earlier discussion. Certainly in this geography, that pasture wants to make timber. And so arguably, depending on where you are in the circle, as a grazer, you're still fighting nature as much as,
okay,
depending on what your
that's a good
comparison
point.
is.
If you talk succession level, if you have enough moisture here, you do, it will go through pasture to trees and shrubs, right? In areas with lower rainfall, it goes downhill through pasture to a very scattered trees and shrubs, like the pinyon pine, the juniper you see in the movies, something like that. To this point, whether it's trees or shrubs, so maybe I shouldn't put pasture there, but if you keep the ground covered, nature is doing its thing and it's the most complex. Whereas over here, we're the simplest. It's simpler. When you work toward this end, nature's just you're bearing the soil. It's like taking your skin and pulling it off. And nature's saying, I don't like this, and it's going to cover in the lower rainfall areas with a cap, maybe where it covers, just to protect itself. Here, maybe with the moss. Or it may work its way all the way to trees if it has enough humidity all the time. My point is, the more of this you do, the more it is difficult. This is why West Jackson and Land Institute is trying to figure out over here, how do we keep it covered and yet raise row crops in it? And not just interseeded, but how do we have perennial polycultures with a big enough grain seed on there to make it commercially viable? And so even our haying is somewhere in here because we're taking the top off and many times taking it away and not feeding it back on the field. So we're robbing material that we grew out of the ground and taking it away. If we feed it back on the field, are we doing it and getting the grazing and the animal impact, and it still costs us. We have to do those things, but to know where you are and what you're doing and how to try to improve the biological capital each year and not decrease it each year, that's what we have to do to be sustainable. In this particular picture here, I'll point out, this ranch I had leased had a fishing club on it, and the fishermen loved to fish these banks because they were collapsing and the fish would hang in there. And so they would be concerned if my cattle got too close, I'd have to fence right there because they wouldn't want those broken. In essence, that would just continue to undercut. And we do want meander, we don't want straight stream. But that should be a bank that, instead of having an overhang on each side of the river where the fish are, that should be more of a V-shaped stream, but it's got plants here that provide the overhang the fish can go under. And then I'm holding my stream. So they were trying to have me preserve something that was really a symptom of bad management in a linear view, then looking at the fishing, trying to make the fishing better. And so as you look at the plant and animal communities and the habitats and what are we trying to create, what can we create, and with the people involved, you can't knock those down without recreating a nice overhang here for the fish, or your income from the fish goes away. So sometimes you have to transition as you change and improve your biological land and what it looks like. You can't go from A to B overnight if it's going to make your business not viable, and then you're not there.
How did it work out there?
Oh, it was kind of fun. They started to understand it eventually, and I put my grazing plan in their clubhouse so when they showed up they could go check where the cattle were, and they could either be close to them or not, or sometimes they'd want to be right behind them because the grass wasn't as tall. The manure had already been sucked into the ground, and that way at least they knew they could go where they wanted. As far as fixing these banks, well, we never got them all done yet. But okay, in this picture, whether it's Pennsylvania or Colorado here, this is just a little drier, but you got trees, shrubs, a few forbs, but all the grasses are gone. They're all grazed out. This happened to be spring. We had just hit that hard because right over here is a main lodge that looked out on this. We wanted lots of forbs, Indian paintbrush, and all these beautiful wildflowers, which is a lower successional stage than grass. But as we started to time the grazing there and got more grass, we got less wildflowers. And the guests were saying, where's the wildflowers? So you need to know what you're trying to create and then create it. And don't just assume it's always a perfect, healthy pasture for grazing. What's wrong with that picture? What's that? No understory. And what about the trees themselves? Although that is a grazable woodland is what that is. So that's okay. And there's a lot of over-rested plants in there. The condition of that we were trying to bring back. But what's wrong with the trees? They're all the same age. So with plants and animals, we're looking for not only diversity of species, but within one species, how about age diversity? There's no teenage trees. They'll last maybe a generation, but then it's all gone. As opposed to having a sustainable continue. Yeah, so here we're talking about intensifying management through mob grazing of livestock and wildlife to help understories. But when you're trying to establish trees, you can't do that with mob grazing. So if you've got a place where you want trees to establish, you need to go to no grazing or low intensity and lower stocking rate to give trees enough years to get up. What are we trying to create? How do we manage tools? There's maybe a stream going through this property, and it's been, whatever the past management has done, it's created maybe really thick trees here. It's been totally over-rested. By over-rested, I mean no large animals, so it's filled in thick with trees and shrubs. And over there, it may have where it was animals hung there all the time, and it's purely grass. Well, I may say I want to take this part and keep part of it because I want the habitat that it provides for some of the wildlife. But I may want to make some of it more savanna-like. I may want to leave that the way it is. But this totally grassed creek over here, I want to bring back some willows. I want some beaver coming in to back this water up to fill up my land. Up there I got too many beaver. I need to do something there. You create what you want. And you're doing it because you're managing tools consciously and unconsciously. What is it I want? I can decide and then create it. If I want to recreate, as I mentioned yesterday one time, if I want to create what's native, well then I need to define what's native. Was that before white man came in 1850? Or was that just when the native tribes were here in 10,000? The question is, more importantly, what do I want now? And then create it. And you can do any one of those things. That's this future landscape description here. As part of your vision for the farm, you have these values that are saying, I want the farm to take me to financial security, independence, and I'm going to do that through some profit, have all the people involved communicating and happy and enjoying life. And I've got this description of my landscape. If this is my farm up here, I want trees there, I want an orchard here, I'm talking pasture here. You know, you can design what you want. And then how do I move toward it from year to year? And I manage the biological systems by looking at these early warning signs. The water cycle, the mineral cycle, the energy flow, and the communities of plants and animals, now they're changing. And see how they're all changing to make sure it's moving me the way I want to go. But I'm looking at those earliest signs because it's telling me, do I have the conditions for the seed germination, for example? It's a little late to measure. These are late ways of monitoring. They're valid, but they're late for management. I could put a meter at the bottom of my property and measure if I've got more or less water flowing off my property. And that's fine, and we do that. Yeah, but we do that. We have government programs that pay to put a measuring device at the bottom of my land. Absolutely. And is water running off? But that's not the earlier warning sign. Is organic matter increasing? Have I gone from 1% to 2% to 3%? That's good to know, but these other signs will tell you earlier. If you're counting litter laid down, if you're counting the amount of capped soil you have, if you're looking at litter 2 in the ground, these are going to tell you earlier if your organic matter is going to increase or decrease. So the early warning signs should tell you of some of these later signs to come. Is it possible to get up to 10% organic matter? It is. But I don't have to wait till the organic matter measures that to know if I'm getting there. So here you would go to a forest and we're holding it back to some level of perennials that are grasses and forbs. If we overgraze and abuse it, we'll knock it back to more annuals. All of our tall flowering or short flowering annuals and perennials of forbs, not grasses, but non-woody forb plants, or we can take it back to bare ground. In 3/4 of the world, it hangs out around here because there's not enough moisture in the air to let things grow. There's only moisture underground. So we use animals or technology to move it forward to either grasses or, if we can, it's difficult to do up to a forest. Well, let's talk just a minute about a transect. So we're out here. We picked a pasture. This room is our pasture. We want to check each year to see how it's improving. It's representative of the farm. Maybe the whole farm. We do 2 or 3 in a year because each one takes us a couple hours to do, and we devote a day a year to going out and measuring the soil surface, see how we're doing. There's a hill or a permanent structure this way. I'm going to run that way across the meadow. I can take a photo point there, so I've got a picture of where I'm going. I can put a post in here if I want to. I can take a couple down shots of the land, but not by the post where animals might rub, so I can have some photo points. But then I can take a dart, and I can either do a straight line or just a random representation, but it's all at random. And where the point hits, I'm going to look at the ecosystem processes. And then that's a baseline for this year. And then next year, I'll have some comparative analysis to tell me where I'm moving. So where the dart hits, I'm going to look and say, did it hit bare soil? Was it covered by plant material? If so, was it that litter 1 laid on the ground? Or is it litter 2 decomposing into the ground? Did it actually hit a plant? Was there a canopy providing shade and protection from raindrops pounding directly on the soil? I'm also going to look at within that area, and you can do it within a 6-inch circle or a foot, just be consistent from year to year. And if you do the monitoring this year, maybe next year you might join him, and then the next year you could take over. But for you to do it this year and you next year, there's enough subjectivity there in how you look and what you judge. It's good to have consistency. And while I'm thinking of that, this hour was enough time to give you an overview of what we're looking at. But in holistic management, there's a big, thick textbook that tells all about it. There's a handbook. This has in there biological monitoring, the whole procedures, a couple of them. It's also got the financial planning in there that we did. It's got the grazing planning, infrastructure planning. Yeah, if a plant material is just laying on the ground, but not incorporated in. Litter 1 is not in the ground decaying yet, but it's covering, it's helping. There's a gal, Pat Richardson at University of Texas in Austin. She's the dung beetle lady. She loves to study the actual underground microorganisms that we all don't know how they work. They're not even all identified. But she takes micron microscopes, electronic, you know what I'm getting at. And yeah, and she's got the videos of looking at these bugs underground. And when you've got a healthy soil, you know, there's air and water space, and airspace for air to get in the soil and water to move. It's not waterlogged. And she's got pictures of bugs in the ground that have as many colors as we do in this room, sitting on different logs and resting and relaxing and eating and living. And it's a whole complexity that we don't understand. And therefore, I suppose we're not even looking at the earliest warning signs by looking at the animals we can see and the plants we see. But if they're healthy, then the things underground that are living have to be producing that living soil. We have to be supporting their habitat at some level. So within a certain area from that, where that dark point hits, capping is helping tell us about the water cycle. Does the ground have a recent cap, an immature cap, a mature cap, and is the water going to hit and run off? We look for animal sign, manure, hoof prints, insect nests, anything, because we're trying to see if we're getting more of it each year. We're looking for annuals. Annuals usually have a bigger seed, and they establish easier. They don't have to be planted at the exact depth to make them come up. So when you disturb soil, if your pasture's got 30% bare ground in it even, which won't show really looking across, as you increase animal impact through some mob grazing or herd effect or timing, you might disturb the soil some and create good conditions for seed establishment. Annuals will come first, or they may come at the same time as the grasses you want. You can't do this work and just have what you want come up. It all comes. So don't be afraid if weeds come. Just manage for what you want, and those plants will take over the others. But we focus on what comes up we don't want, and we pull it out, and we still got bare ground, and then it comes up again. You've got to go through a stage of nature covering itself. Usually, even with some of the exotic invaders, if we really manage for what we want, the other will stay in check. If we try to get rid of everything to the individual plant that we don't want, well, I don't know if that's sustainable, because you'll run out of time and labor and money to be in business. But we can surely manage to be in control for the most part. And then this goes to your point about we do look at plants. The first two things have really geared on the soil surface. But what is the nearest perennial plant? Its habitat means, is it a hydrophytic, really wet-growing plant? Is it a dry plant? Is it in the middle? But what is its age? So we start to get a sense of how many young and teenage plants we have, seedlings versus just mature plants. Its form. Is it over-rested? Is it full of old material, old tan material, 2 and 3 years old, maybe starting to go gray? Or is it a normal plant that's just healthy? And then its species. So we can do, obviously, the species identification there. Trees. That's a good point. The time of year to do this would be usually in a time when it's in the most active growing season. So you've got insects flying and things growing and bugs around. So May, June, maybe July. I mean, I've done them in October or November as a baseline when you start working with somebody at that time of year. But then ideally try to do it right in the middle of the summer. And you might not want to do it in the heat of the day, maybe in a cooler morning or evening, so that when life is out and about. And we summarize it. You end up with percentages of what's capped and how far to the nearest plant. Did we go from 2 inches to 1.5 inches to the nearest perennial plant? That's a good sign. But you can't see that by the eye without doing some sense of a monitoring. Is this an absolute to the exact scientific method study? No. But it's good enough for managers, and most managers in the world, that's all they'll ever have a chance to do. We can't wait for the other kind of study, and it's not any more accurate than this will tell us. Overall, is our management improving?
What you're saying is Get it covered.
Get it covered. Bare ground is the enemy.
Nature likes when it's covered.
Yeah.
Earthworms and the underground
Right.
likes when it's covered.
So even the moss, if you leave it all alone and it's kind of stuck in that below optimum pasture, and you got a few trees starting to come up, and eventually trees would take over, it's covered. So that's good from keeping your soil there. Maybe you're not keeping all your water yet, but then the question is, what are you trying to create? Do you need an income from that? Do you have an enterprise that needs forest? Do you need better pasture? Are you so low in succession, or you got enough, or you're starting to go out of pasture into trees? You need to bring in hogs to do some rooting, and have unringed hogs for a few years, and then ring them later when you get pasture and still want to graze. Discussions on tools, right? We then look at if things are changing, if there's no change toward where we're trying to go, or if they're changing the wrong way, what's causing it? We're going to talk tools here in just a second before we wrap up. So an annual monitoring of the ground, of the soil surface, because it's the earliest time to show us what's going on, shows the direction we're heading. And it's just like training your eye to look at an animal and see what's her finish, what's her health, what's her composition, how do we like her form, what kind of calf will she throw. Training ourselves to look at the ground and see what we're seeing, see what it's telling us. And by looking at the ecosystem processes through one of these 4 ways. It's what we're trying to do. I threw this in here just to broaden it out a little bit. As far as a daily monitoring, if you're actually, again, having animals on the land, you can look at the paddocks they're in. How much are we taking off? Are we taking too much off? And look, these things are looking at the animal performance. Is the animal's gut full? You know, when she's standing there on a rumen, the left side, in front of that pin bone, in front of that hip bone, is she full? Are we getting her full? You know, you and I we don't eat a Thanksgiving meal every day. But we want her to. We want her to have all she has. We don't want her, she'll eat a half a meal and look at you and you won't know she's half full instead of full. Same thing looking at the consistency of the dung, and that's not really what this workshop's about, but the point there is that animal performance is critical. We're not just trying to improve the land to get the biological capital coming. We have to do that. But the animal is usually what's giving us, or the crop that's coming out of a pastured land, that's what's giving us the cash flow to exist. We can't ignore that. It's not a linear decision, one way this way, one way that. We're managing this whole picture, and it all has to fit. Daily monitoring, we look, this is more related to grazing. We can't go back to plants till they've regrown. So in the pasture they're in, or the pasture we had left, the previous ones, we can tell how fast plants are recovering. Where we're going next, we want to make sure plants are ready to go into. We've got enough feed for the time we think we need to be in there. But let's talk here about this for just a minute. We use these tools on the land, and that's what's changing the biology. Lots of technology. We could seed it, irrigate it, tile it, drain it, fence it, bulldoze it, by genetically modified seed, by non-genetically modified seed. We can burn it. We can totally leave it alone from large animals, which is what this tool of rest means. Or you could put some animals on a field, but still part of it is partially rested, like we were talking about earlier. We also inadvertently use this tool here, allowing the habitat to be created for other animals to do their work. Voles, moles, beaver, birds. You know, are we creating a habitat where they're doing their things that help build this complex polyculture, which is what we need in again, the grazing system. And anything opposed to that is at that other end of that scale over there on the board. Even when we go to market garden, we're bearing the ground in most cases, and then planting, maybe it's more diverse in a smaller area, but it's still fighting nature some. Nothing wrong with that, although it's harder to do. These are the two tools that we use to manage and maintain and garden large landscapes. They need to be used right. If they're used wrong, they're so powerful they can damage. But used right, they're the only tools that can bring back large landscapes. And I should say, whether it's livestock or wildlife, either way. But they need the whole system. If the predator's not there to keep them bunched and moving, then we need you to do it with your fence and your management, or herd them. Fencing is technology. There's irrigation, that's technology. Fire, that's a light fire. Didn't burn too hard. You drove across it with a pickup afterwards, and the tracks cleaned it right up. Here you get moss. Where I live, if you rest it, it goes downhill into a little bit of forbs, and you have a long enough time. We know when an anthill gets built this big, well, that's taken a few years. You know, you've had rest, no large animals there. If that's what I'm wanting to create, I'm doing a good job of it. In this case, the beaver for this guy's place, allowing these beaver to come in, it raised his water level 2 feet all the way from that hill to the one on this side of the valley. That's what he needed. He didn't need less water. Hit this for a minute here. If you're trying to have healthy plants come up every year, every time they grow, be healthier and healthier, then this photo is showing that when you graze them, that's all. If you keep it at that level, that's all the root mass it'll do. But if you let it grow up to, say, that level each time, and then take it back down there, it'll put out that. If you let it grow up to that level and then take it down to there each time, there's your corresponding root mass. But if you let the leaf blades fully grow each time, look at the living soil you're going to create. And every time you graze it, food moves from the roots to the top, so it dies off and kills roots. That's how you're building organic matter and then humus. So if you're continually doing this to your top above ground, this is what you got below. And then back to your point, how can you have this living soil? Which, you were saying we need to measure it better, and I agree. But, those are costly measurements. Carbon measurements are costly. We can know through our management that we're improving the health of our soil. This is a place.
Maybe why sometimes you find grazing. In other words, the mob grazing is you're increasing your humus level, and you're letting your roots do the work. Nature's doing its work down there. You let it get a little bigger.
Exactly, and we don't know exactly what all it's doing, but by two tools. When you put an animal on a piece of land, they graze and they have animal impact. So we have to time the grazing. Mob grazing is just animal impact through stock density, increasing the tightness of the herd. We've still got to have the timing with that. So when you do both of those correctly, yes, you can tremendously increase production. Less where I live, unless I'm on an irrigated meadow, a lot more where you live, because you've just got the productive capacity, the moisture.
Another way of looking at it, I've been noticing, in other words, the philosophy was short grazing up till mob grazing just kind of came in within the last several years.
Under that name, it's been around under increasing animal impact for a while.
Right, but what I want to say is, I've been noticing if you let hay fields and cut them for haylage,
Yeah.
you get more off.
Well, you're letting it recover fully, aren't you?
And that's what I'm wondering if that's not why. You're letting the roots do the work.
Exactly. It's like a fitness program for land. Every time you let the plant fully regrow, it should come a little more before it tries to put out a seed stalk. A few more leaves, a few taller leaves, a little wider leaves, because you're not stressing it. The challenge with the haylage is if you don't feed it back to the land, then you've mined it and taken it away. And that's why we try to continue to put it back on the same
But
land.
I was looking at a standpoint of you get more off per acre.
That's right. Yeah. And then if you're doing that all through grazing and not spending the dollars or the time to hay, even if you love it, and fighting knotters on the hay equipment, if you just graze it, That's kind of the ultimate productive capacity that you're describing you'll get. That's correct. If that's what you're wanting to do. And for most of us with a pasture, it is. But I will point back that, we're just about going to wrap up here. I'll point back that mob grazing or managing land like that will produce more grass. And so you've got to put that in the context of your whole farm planning. If you don't need more grass right now, if you can't sell what you've got, or the product isn't any good you're raising, or as good as it could be, you have to consider, should I put my money and time into those things first before I produce more grass? And the answer could be any one of those three. Each one of us in the room could have a different answer for this year, and then 2013 might be in the next year. But you're exactly right on the concept of mob grazing there. You're enhancing that tool of animal impact, which is this. So this is going from a bare ground, a place I turned into a sacrifice area, feeding on it, trying to get them to actually get it incorporated in the ground.
Now, when you're out in Texas where it's dry land area, it's a whole different management, whole different story.
Well, that's the key. When somebody says, do this on your land, you need to know this concept of regularity of moisture above ground, because it's always fairly humid underground, but above it's not. So if you use a tool on a piece of land that is not very regular humidity versus where it's very humid, you may get different results. Here you've got a lot of regular humidity. If you use fire or extreme animal impact and bare the ground, it will cover over and grow back. It may be stuck in some low level of succession, but it will cover. If you do that in an area with low humidity, like 3/4 of the world, you bare it with fire or animal impact, it'll stay bare ground and it'll just blow and wash away. So when you get a recommendation from sometimes from a private company or a government agency, sometimes it's not, they've given you a mass solution without understanding this whole concept of brittleness, which is this, I've alluded to it a couple times today, but that humidity above ground is a whole other way to measure. Amount is tropical and arid. Above ground humidity is brittle, non-brittle, and how things decay. And when you live in this middle part of the country, from central Nebraska right on through to here, varying farms and varying areas, various slopes of hills have different degrees of this decay ability, and that's why you need to learn to read your land and see, am I seeing much gray at all, or is it all brown? It's all cycling within a couple of years. But could I speed that up if I'm trying to get income through livestock especially? Or how can I use livestock? The bottom line kind of is we can't do cropping without livestock. Essentially, because it's the cheap, effective way to keep us where we got the best nature working with us the most at some way, some form of intermixing.
Now, how would you recommend to do cropping without livestock?
With lots of money and outside inputs. And so our goal is to reduce those to be profitable.
You should keep in mind, when you do tear it up, cover it as quick as you can.
Exactly. Use these principles to make farming work. The bare ground, 50-year corn in a row obviously takes the most inputs, and the soil's just there to hold the plant up. We're giving it all its food and maybe water if we live where we have to irrigate, or you're getting it from the air here, but other than that, we're giving it everything it needs. So that's not sustainable. If you pass that through the testing guidelines, who's going to pay for that? Your farm probably can't forever. But as you combine those with perennial crops, cover crops, all the things we used to do, that is how we make cropping more sustainable. And we need cropping. We need market gardens. But how do we combine these things? Chickens on the garden. How do I do pigs in a garden? Livestock once in a while to cut my inputs and do it with an income-producing enterprise. Improve the biological capital. Just for kicks, this is not you. This is an area of the world where things can't decay because there's no regular humidity above ground. So just for broaden all of our thought beyond Pennsylvania, where is the non-brittle, the real human, where is the humid environment where things decay in that picture? Below the surface. Where is it above the surface? There you go. It's in the rumen of that ruminant. So he's eating it, putting it in there, decays, goes on the ground, tromps it in. 3/4, folks, of the world's surface is like this, and you take that animal away and you expect it to be productive. You take, my son and daughter-in-law were doing some work in Kenya with the Maasai on how to manage animals. This is just beyond me. They're the ones who are supposed to be the experts. We've taken them away from animals and away from herding and away from, intuitively, they were moving animals and mimicking, and we break that and settle them on farms in this kind of environment, or same with the Navajos in northeast Arizona, and we expect it to be a productive ecosystem. See, there's some basic principles here, and you're not to that extreme here, but I do see hints of gray around here, okay? Anyway, last slide.
That, hints of gray are what?
It's been there long enough, it hasn't oxidized, the gray means it's oxidizing into the air, it's rusting away. Either the microorganisms weren't at the soil surface enough to make that thing fall over and then suck it in the ground, that you need to put it down with mowing or with livestock or something to get it into your ground instead of losing it. That's all the gray means. It's not extreme for you guys, but for you guys, you can really bring back productivity. I need 20 acres for an animal. You can do it on 5, maybe 3, maybe 1 if you start just cycling this. That says, this is California, drifting sand subject to flood. What does it mean?
It's not managed well.
It's not managed well, it's extreme. What's broken? Think about the ecosystem processes. Want a hint? The water cycle. There's enough capped ground and bare ground down in here. It all evaporates, it all dries out. When there's no rain, it's just when the wind blows, it blows. And then when the rains come, it's capped over, it can't soak in. It comes, you've been waiting 6 months for rain, we need rain. We need rain is what you're saying. All right, it comes, and there it goes. And this is going up a hill, folks. This isn't in a draw. But it's coming off these hills that are over here.
So we're on
Broken water cycle.
We're on our way to looking like Iraq.
Yeah, but after doing a lot of work in the West and now a ton in the last few years in New England, New York, and here in Virginia, we got the same thing in many areas. We don't have the ability to suck up that swimming pool 1-inch rain on each acre, but because you have enough humidity, you're leaning enough toward non-brittle above ground, that when it dumps hard, we're still losing it. Because you got enough of all that conditions for plants to grow, you've got weeds, you've got covered ground. But if you look, you've got some pedestaling of plants, you've got soil moving, you certainly have water moving, you've got stream banks with straight sides. They're not V-shaped and covered, they're straight-sided and eroding. And it's there still, and you can improve, the bottom line, I guess I'm trying to say, is you can improve the productivity of your farm more than you think you can. And you can do it quicker here than I can. You've got better growing conditions, lots of potential. So what we're saying is learn to see the ecosystem processes in the broad sense. And all the other knowledge you have of specifically being able to do it is great. But which way you're going. You need to know with your building or decreasing my biological capital here. I have to see what I'm seeing first. So just practice that. And then you can move into monitoring it, etc. Okay? Appreciate your interest because I think it'll help.